Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, wherever you're joining us, whether that be again California, uh, Idaho, Florida, Michigan, wherever it is, we just want to say welcome back to Ethos Online. So, Ethos Online, again, what we do that I would argue is a little different, and I think I would call it special. We take a lot of time, a lot of energy to ask really difficult questions of this ancient text. And so we're constantly asking, what does the original language mean? Who wrote this piece? Who was it intended for? With all of that said, what was the original message and the context, the application, all of that? What was the historical context? Once we do that, then we do, I would argue, even more difficult work of finding an application for today. And so we've been doing this with the book of Genesis, I would argue, for almost 2 years now. And it has been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of energy, a lot of work, but I think it's worth it. And so at the end of this time together with Genesis, we're going to have something really special to offer. We can share with people this beautiful gift of, look, it's a whole study, in depth, phrase by phrase, verse by verse. We look at rabbinical interpretations from that time era and after. And again, it's so interesting. The stuff that we have found as we move through this text. I thought I knew this book. And as I studied even deeper and deeper, there were so many extra things that I didn't know. And so I've been learning as you've been learning and growing just from reading the book again. And so this has been an awesome, awesome study. We're on chapter 43 coming up, and it's been a fantastic journey again. We're going to get up to chapter 50. So good. But a reminder again, the book of Genesis, not a history book. It was never written with specific dates, names, times, eras like we look at history today. The whole point of Torah, again, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the whole point of this, these compilations of stories and all that, it was essentially because it was a response to being in captivity. 587 BC under Babylonian captivity. They're compiling what it means to be a Jew, right? And what it means to be an Israelite. So their fear of assimilating, forgetting who they are, is what drove them to put all of their stories, all of their messages from kings, all their rituals, everything into this piece, so that later on, when they leave captivity and the future generations get a hold of it, they can say, this is who we are, right? We didn't assimilate like all the other tribes under Babylonian captivity. We stayed true. We kept Judaism kosher. That was the point of writing it. And so today, let's delve into Genesis chapter 42, verses 23 through 38. We're finishing off, and next week we hit chapter 43. So, one more reminder, this is not just a book about a kid with a colorful coat. Yeah, this is about Israel, right? When Jewish people read this piece, and still do today, they see themselves in the story. They are Joseph. They are the brothers, right? They're the nation experiencing famine. They're the nation that must depend on their enemies and support their enemies in order to get through the famine, right? They're the nation that learns to, during times of plenty, learn to store up the joy, store up the blessings in order to survive the captivity, the 7 years of famine, right? This is all Israel. And again, we start with the scanning. Pharaoh scans, he sees the whole thing, he sees the dream, and this sends Joseph into this beautiful upward movement where he becomes nobility and he's able to save his people. That's where we are now. And so Joseph has his brothers visiting, and there's this reconciliation that's taking place. We moved through the first part of reconciliation. We're going to touch on step 2 and then step 3 the following week. So step 2, it's going to involve this section today. So let's read 23 through 38, and we'll delve in. So here we go. They did not know that Joseph understood, for the interpreter was between them. So keep in mind, Joseph is listening to his brothers who don't realize, they think Joseph is an Egyptian, right? So they're talking in Hebrew, and they assume Joseph doesn't understand anything they're saying. And so, of course, they said, we're cursed because we killed our brother, right? And he's hearing it. He understands Hebrew, right? So here we go. He turned away from them and wept. then returned to them and spoke to them, and he took Simeon from among them and imprisoned him before their eyes. Joseph commanded, and they filled their vessels with grain, and he commanded to return their money into each one's sack, and to give them provisions for the journeys, and he did so for them. And they loaded up the grain for their donkeys, and they went away from there. The one opened his sack, so this is later on in the story. He opens his sack to give fodder to his donkey at the lodging place, and he saw his money there it was in the mouth of his sack. And he said to his brothers, "My money has been returned, and indeed here it is in my sack." Oh no, right? He didn't get the money he was supposed to be given. Oh no. Their hearts sank, and trembling, they turned to one another, saying, "What is it that God has done to us?" And they came back to Jacob their father, to the land of Canaan, and they told him all that had befallen them, saying, "The man, the Lord of the land, spoke to us harshly, and accused us of spying on the land. And we said to him, 'We are honest, we were never spies. We are 12 brothers, the sons of our father. One is gone, and today the youngest is with our father in the land of Canaan.' And the man, the Lord of the land, said to us, 'With this I will know you are honest. Leave one of your brothers with me, and what is needed for the hunger of your households, take and go. And bring your youngest brother to me, so that I will know that you are not spies, that you are honest. Then I will give you and your brother, and you may travel around in the land.' And it came to pass that they were emptying their sacks, and behold, each one's bundles of money was in their sack. They saw the bundles of their money, they and their father, and they became frightened, because again, they paid for that food, and somehow it came back. Oh no, it seems they are thieves, right? And their father Jacob said to them, 'You are bereaved me. Joseph is gone, and Simeon is gone, and you want to take Benjamin? All these troubles have come upon me.' And Reuben spoke to his father, saying, 'You may put my 2 sons to death if I don't bring him, Benjamin, to you. Put him into my hands, and I will return him to you.'" Again, it's an interesting kind of setback back to when Benjamin had, and Reuben had, and all of them had Joseph in their keeping, right? It's kind of a reliving moment, and we'll get into that. But he, Jacob, said, "My son shall not go down with you, because his brother is dead, and he alone is left. And if more misfortune befalls him on the way you are going, you will bring down my gray head in sorrow to the grave." Essentially, I will die. So let's delve into some of this. It's really a pretty interesting story, a really interesting section. So look at verse 23. They did not know that Joseph understood, for the interpreter was between them. We start with this fact that Joseph knows what his brothers are saying. He knows his brother's guilty feelings, right? Joseph, we're reminded, he is still a Hebrew, right? His identity is not Egyptian. His identity is still Hebrew. And again, this is an important message if you are an Israelite, right? Holding on to your identity is so important in their narrative. Holding on to who you are, the ritual, all of those things, that's so key to being a Hebrew. Staying monotheistic as opposed to polytheistic. All of these elements, he has stayed true to his God, even though he is in captivity and now holds a position of power. He is still a Hebrew. Now, remember our 3 encounters, 3 phases of reconciliation. So this is reconciliation phase 2. And this is what was said. Matthew Borowitz, again, director of Israelite programs, he says this: Joseph's second encounter with his brothers brings him a step closer toward reconciliation. This time, Joseph reestablishes more of a connection to his family. So Joseph is basically, he's going to find his roots back home to Israel. He's going to have to go back to family. He's going to have to understand that again. He's been away for a very long time. He was cut off from his family, right? And if you're an Israelite, you are feeling cut off from not just your God, but also each other. Right? You are not celebrating the feast days like you would normally. You're not celebrating what it means to be a Hebrew. And so you are cut off. And so this story begins with a reminder: Joseph has held on to what it means to be Hebrew. And yet he's been cut off from family. So how does Joseph, How does he regain that severed relationship? How does he heal it again? How is there reconciliation so he can find his roots again? So the way he's going to find it, we're going to have to go back home, right? Going back home, though, is a little different in this story, right? Home is actually going to come to him. And so for many of us, I think we get this. We've experienced this when we went back home. Some of you went off to college and then you came back home and it was different. Your room was once your room, but now it's the theater room, it's the sewing room, whatever it is. But after getting back there, after being away from Michigan for years and years and years and going back, I had some interesting moments. I was reminded of where I grew up. I was reminded of different emotions and regrets, different moments of like, oh, did I really do that? And oh, that was so much fun there. There's reconciliation when you go back home, when you experience family, home, memories again. And so for Israel, this means for them to experience home again, for them to have a reconciliation, a moment where they actually are reconnected to their identity of being a Hebrew after being in slavery, they're gonna have to look back. Right? They're going to have to reconnect to ritual again. And if you haven't done a thing for a while, it's not easy to begin it again. And so they're going to learn how to keep Passover again. Right? They're going to learn how to keep Feast of Unleavened Bread. They're going to learn how to do tabernacles again. They're going to learn how to celebrate and dance again. Right? They're going to learn all of these things, but it's going to take time, and it's going to have them essentially learn how to look back and connect severed roots. That's what's going to need to take place. And so for Joseph, Joseph is Israel. And so for him, he's going to play out these parts throughout this section and even into chapter 43. And so notice this, and he turned away from them and he wept. So after experiencing this, after realizing the hurt and the pain, his brothers are right back there again. Imagine like he's back to being little Joseph again, and he's watching his brothers, and he's being reminded of all the pain and the brokenness, the trauma. He weeps. He weeps. The phrase here in the Hebrew, it means to turn away in order to show emotion. Avoid one showing full emotion. There's even a concept of compassion here. You're turning away to show that you don't want to hurt someone else or hurt someone or bring them in. So you're showing compassion. You feel bad for them, and so you're weeping. That's the idea. And when I read that in the Hebrew, I was reminded of this moment. Actually, two. I was reminded when Jesus sees Israel and he begins realizing how broken it is, and at some point, how the whole thing is going to collapse. It says here, the shortest sentence here in the New Testament, but the most beautiful. Not most, but one of the most beautiful. It says, when Jesus saw her weeping, and he saw the Jews who came with her weeping, he groaned. Right? He saw this friend that had died, all these people broken, all these people grieving. It says he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. He wept. He wept. We're also told when he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, he leaves them. He turns away from them. Right? And there's another idea there of weeping. And so notice this. One of the reasons, I like this, one of my favorite commentators says this, one reason that Jesus turns away, weeps, has to shift from Gethsemane, has to shift from them at this moment. One reason is simply the deep compassion that Jesus felt for those who were suffering. He weeps and turns away here as well as in the garden. And so again, Joseph, just like Jesus here, he feels compassion for his brothers and on his people, right? His people, this whole time that all this is happening, you better believe Joseph would have been thinking about his people still. His heart would have been breaking knowing his family is going to experience famine, potentially death. And so this compassion, it causes him to turn away. And that's the same compassion that will lead him to experience restoration and forgiveness with his brothers. He's going to feel compassion even for those who hurt him because he understands they're still my brothers, right? There's still family. They're still family. Compassion, not anger, not hate, not revenge. Compassion is what leads him to weep, to turn away for a moment. It's so beautiful when you understand that. Verse 24. He took Simeon from among them and he imprisoned him before their eyes. So, interesting point here. Most rabbinical interpretations say Simeon was the one that first spoke when they had this idea of throwing Joseph into the pit. Yeah, so interesting. It's like he's almost repeating certain wrongs that were done in order to kind of move into a new reality. And this is another Jewish tradition will often do this, right? If you did this wrong, well, in the later on in the narrative, this is going to be done wrong to you, right? So Simeon now is paying for his wrong, and you're going to see this a little bit more in this narrative. So 25, Joseph commanded, and they filled their vessels with grain. And he commanded to return their money into each one's sack and to give them provisions for the journey, and he did so for them. And again, they're not aware of exactly what he's doing. He's being pretty conniving. And they loaded their grain upon their donkeys, and they went away from there. So he blesses his brothers. He has compassion on Israel. Yeah, just like the divine will have compassion on Israel. Israel begins to experience the sustaining power of God during the famine, during the brokenness. They're going to be sustained, even in the middle of captivity. And he said to his brothers, verse 28, my money, right? They notice this moment, so they're taken off, they go, and then notice this part now. Verse 28, our money's gone. Indeed, it's here in the sack. Their hearts sink, they're trembling, they turn to one another. Notice what they say here. What is it that God has done to us? What is it that God has done to us? I always find this really interesting. When various biblical characters, when they do wrong, it's so fascinating to me. The blame of their consequences are often, not always, but often, they place it on God. Right? I did this wrong, and now this and this and this is happening. Oh God, why are you cursing me? Reality check here, right? The truth is, when we consider the narrative deeper, is God really the one doing this? Well, no. I think Paul says it best in Romans. He says the wages of the wages of sin is death. Eternal life in Christ, Jesus our God, that's our gift, right? And that's my own paraphrase here, but essentially the consequences of our actions, right, can sometimes lead to brokenness. That makes sense. It's not God sending down these curses like Zeus, angry with us. That's not actually reality, is it? Reality is you do something, and often it's going to have a consequence. Sometimes it's immediate, sometimes it grows, sometimes it takes a while. But consequences often follow when we miss the mark, or when we're purposely missing the mark, right? This God is not an angry God or wrathful God, but one that brings life for Israel. That was their understanding. And so it's fascinating, though, when you see these little moments where it's like they want to blame the divine. But truth is, there was also a deep understanding as a Jewish person. They understood the divine is not in the business of sending down curses. Blessings fall on the good and the bad. That's blessings fall. It's not God sending down wrathful lightning bolts, right? We understand in the story, they cause their own consequences to happen. Yeah, we know the deeper story. They don't understand it yet, but they will later on. Verse 29, and they came to Jacob, their father, so they get home in the land of Canaan, again, the land of milk and honey, but it's no longer the land of milk and honey, just like Egypt is no longer prosperous, yet they did something that Canaan did not. You ever think about that before? In this narrative, why didn't God tell Jacob in a land of milk and honey, a prosperous, fruitful land, to save up his resources during those 7 years? Why was it Egypt? Yeah, because for there to be reconciliation, sometimes you have to go back. Sometimes that wrong needs to be righted. in order for the thing to be complete, before restoration to happen. That's a really good point. I hope you remember that. When I read that, I was like, this is so good, right? So again, they go to the land where it's plentiful. It's basically Joseph is going to, the story of Joseph now, from here on out, in this section, it's going to be the story of Joseph basically in rewind. That's exactly what's going to happen. You're going to see interesting parallels all throughout now. The brothers have to experience what Joseph experienced. Yeah. And it came to pass that they were emptying their sacks, and behold, each one's bundle of money was in his sack. They saw the bundles of their money, they and their father, and they became frightened, right? So the whole thing flips. They have been, the individual they thought that they were under, were going to treat them well. And unfortunately, he flips it on them, and they're about to experience brokenness. They're about to be imprisoned. They're about to maybe experience death now if they find out. This is the Potiphar story again. Again, everything in rewind now. The brothers imprisoned, right? In the pit. This is where Simeon is. Now they're going to have to travel. Notice this. They're traveling all the way back across the desert. It's the story of Joseph in rewind. Yeah, so interesting, right? Verse 36. You have bereaved me. Joseph is gone. So the father, they tell him, we got to take Benjamin. And the father says, I cannot. Are you serious right now? Right? Simeon is gone. You want to take Benjamin? Benjamin, all these troubles have come upon me. Right? Jacob is just laying it on thicker. These consequences, you've done something, right? We all know what the consequences were. We all know what they did and why things keep falling on them, right? They're having to live now the Joseph narrative. They're having to experience what he experienced. And Jacob is like, man, the story is just laying it on thick, right? And so, verse 38, my son shall not go down with you, because his brother is dead, and he alone is left, and its misfortune befalls him on the way you are going. You will bring down my gray head in sorrow to the grave. He basically is saying here, and we'll find out in verse 43, what happens with the rest of this, but basically says, look, this is my last lament, right? This is terrible. Things are going worse than ever. He eventually, right? We know he's going to allow Benjamin to go. But the deeper message here is for Joseph and his brothers is that sometimes for real forgiveness to happen, stage 2, right, that we talked about, we have to remember and we have to experience the pain of those consequences before we can move forward. And so this was the story. Jacob has to now, once again, just from the beginning of our story of Joseph, now Jacob is bereaved again. Jacob now feels the pain and the brokenness just like it was when Joseph died. So we just experienced Joseph's story 2.0 with the brothers backwards. So in order sometimes as a nation, Israel's reminded there's so much brokenness, so much pain. There was so much fighting among you during captivity. Now you have to allow some time for those consequences to kind of follow. Right? Even longer in captivity, maybe. This might happen, right? Before you can fully live again. Sometimes you have to allow the full consequences of captivity, of brokenness, of leading your nation in the wrong direction. Sometimes those consequences will fall. And sometimes we have to allow it to happen, right? In order for us to move on. And it's so difficult. I love this picture of this heart here because it reminded me repairing relationships is difficult, right? For Israel, this was a relationship between them and the divine, them and each other as a nation. And so it takes work, doesn't it? It takes work. Difficult conversations have to happen. Difficult things sometimes need to take place. Consequences, right? Sometimes have to take place before life can start again. And so we ask forgiveness. We change patterns. We admit when we were wrong. Those kind of things have to happen. And the only way they happen is sometimes we have to relive those moments through conversations, through admittance of fault and guilt. Those are the things that sometimes need to happen. And so phase 2 for Israel, phase 2 for Joseph and his brothers, they relive those things again. in order that they might be reminded of it so that it won't do it again. Sometimes you have to rip the Band-Aid off, experience a little pain again in order for that new life to take place, in order for healing to begin. And this is essentially the idea here in chapter 42, phase 2 of restoration. I hope you enjoyed that. I wanted to think of. I was thinking, how do we bring this home? Right, phase 2. It's a little bit shorter one, but I would argue it's a really beautiful one and a difficult one sometimes to swallow, especially relationally. Right. So how do we take it home? I like this idea. I tracked down some of this. Brene um, uh, Brene Brown, she says this, and again, I thought it was so fascinating. She says, how to have difficult conversations with someone that hurt you is sometimes one of the most difficult things we can do. And so she says, there is some advice, though, that she gives that she said it can be so helpful because for you to move on, for you to fully experience restoration, those difficult conversations have to happen. You cannot just put it off. You can't just say, "Oh, things are okay." Joseph can't simply just say to his brothers, "All right, I forgive you. Let's move on." He's got to do the difficult work. He's got to rip off the Band-Aid. He's got to have the difficult conversations. Things need to be relived again. So, how do we do this? How do we apply it today? Let me share the advice she gives. She says this: first, think on it. Let me read to you just straight from the book. She says, before you confront this person, think about the situation. Have you truly been treated badly? Interesting question, right? Was it really, did that happen? Is that real? Many times it is, right? Is there anything else that may be contributing to your emotions? That's an interesting question. Are you also adding other baggage? Is Joseph not just mad about his brothers, but also how Potiphar treated them? And is he putting that on them? Interesting thing to consider, right? Bounce a situation off a trusted friend with no agenda other than to explore it, she says. Take some time to understand your feelings. If you still feel the same, you are probably onto something. There is something that needs to be discussed. Number 2, consider your triggers. The truth is, we all have them. We all have things that trigger us, words, phrases, a response from someone, maybe even just a look, right? Whatever it is. She says this: if you decide that you're being wronged and you wish to speak up, think about the situations and encounters with this person that tend to upset you. Yeah, I can think of those people in my past that just right. Everything they did, it seemed that they were just out to get me at that time, or they wanted to hurt me, or whatever it was. They would do certain things, right? She said, "What usually triggers you? How do you feel when they upset you? Do you get a sensation, a feeling of hot?" Tightness in your chest. It's important to explore this because when you confront them, you need to be prepared to do so calmly and rationally. And I'll never forget this. I had an individual, I finally decided to confront them. This has been years and years ago, but I was so worked up that none of what I wanted to say actually came out because my face was hot, my breathing was so heavy, irrational, and the things that wanted to come out didn't. The things that shouldn't have come out did. Right? So considering your triggers, considering how you respond is going to make that conversation so much easier. So good, right? Number 3, set reasonable expectations. If you're like me, you think about this is going to be a great flowery ending. Things are going to be fantastic. There's going to be a choir singing in the background, restoration or whatever, that's what you assume is going to happen. There's going to be a movie written about this moment. You get these crazy expectations, but the truth is sometimes we have to set some more reasonable ones. And so she says this: if you go into this with an expectation of an apology or acknowledgement of being in the wrong, you may feel like speaking your mind didn't work. Yeah, sometimes the person is not going to say, you're right. They may have the very opposite response. Remember, you are standing up for yourself to be true to yourself. And so that's the important part, which means you need to be open to the potential of consequences. You need to know how you will respond if this doesn't pan out as you'd hoped. This is such a beautiful, really important moment, right? Knowing that whatever happens, it's really about you. You are sharing how you're feeling. And if they don't accept it, if they don't want to take responsibility, it has less to do with you and more about them, right? Their heart, not yours. You are doing the difficult work here. And maybe years later, as that thing sits with them, maybe something will happen, maybe not, but don't expect it. Do the right thing because it's the right thing for you. And then second to last, she says, choose words carefully. And this is good, right? Know what you're going to say in advance. Be honest, straightforward. I like this. Don't dance around it. Don't add a bunch of drama to it. Be straightforward. There's no need to drag up various incidents that are not relevant here. Focus on precisely what has happened that has upset you and explain your reason. You don't have to drug up everything that is irrelevant to the situation, right? Bring up the thing and the thing only, right? Don't add a bunch of crazy things to it. You don't have to be ultra dramatic. Save that for the movie later, right? Then lastly, again, don't play the victim card. When you begin to play the victim card, like we spoke of last week, things go sour. She says, avoid the victim card, but allow yourself to be true, honest. You can be confident in this moment. Don't sink back down to the victim. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun for me. Again, restoration part 2, so important that we learn. Sometimes it's important to relive that step. Sometimes it's important to go back and experience those consequences fully together. Sometimes having those difficult conversations is exactly what is needed. So everyone, please consider going to ethos-church.org/donate. We are a tax-deductible organization. We work really hard every week to try to put this together. And so please consider journeying with us to put these videos out. Many of you have said, I'd love to be a part of a community. I don't really have one here. Please email me, tonywerfel@gmail.com. I'd love to connect you to one online where we have these great discussions. We're able to bring up interesting perspective from all over the nation. And so please consider doing that. And then as always, hit that subscribe button, share this video, pound those like buttons, do all of that. Please share these. We're excited after this is all finished to be able to share this playlist of 2+ years of Genesis. Everyone, I love you. Can't wait to see you next week as we delve into chapter 43. Talk to you soon.